Chip Tam and football. That's what Pittsburgh does. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the show. Brian Batko here from the Post-Gazette, one of your Steelers beat writers, hosting as always. Sorry I was off last week, and we had some technical difficulties, so no show. But we've got a fun one coming up today with Shelby Cassesse of WPXI. Shelby, I think you've been on one of the Post-Gazette shows before, but that was probably before you were in this new reporting role. So welcome to a kind of new version of it. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I was on with Chris Carter. Oh gosh, maybe less than a year ago, but it was around the same time I started at Channel 11. So excited to be on here as we flip the page to the new Steelers season, and a lot of differences from the last time I was on here with the Steelers team.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's for sure. I remember like the first day of OTAs walking in talking to Pat Fryermuth. I'm just like, so not much has changed around here, right?
Right.
But yeah. So it's been a fun couple weeks of OTAs. The third and final week of OTAs starting up today, Tuesday, on the South Side, and then of course they'll have that week of mandatory mini camp. But first, we'll get into all that first. As always, shows brought to you by Pella. No better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free at-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. All right, Shelby, so I'll just start with a simple one. I mean, Ray Fittipaldo, Carter, and I, we've droned on plenty these last six days of practices of what we've seen, trying to come up with some storylines for football in shorts in May. It's also now June, so we flipped the calendar a month as well. I'll give you the floor. What have you learned about this Steelers team, about the offense, the defense, the special teams units, or an individual player or coach from what you've observed thus far down in the South Side? Give us a fresh perspective.
Yeah, and you know what? It's so difficult to make really concrete observations on the field at this time of year that are going to carry over into the fall, right? It is football in shorts. We are seeing just a sliver of really what the Steelers team is going to look like. And so I really feel like this time of year, those observations are best found in the locker room, talking to these guys over what's happened during the off season. Obviously, there have been a lot of changes, and obviously their first impression of a lot of the new schemes, a lot of the new approaches, a lot of the new personnel, because as we know, the Steelers did do an overhaul in a lot of ways, especially on offense, of course. And so that's really where my biggest takeaway is, I think, is with the Steelers offense. You know, you get the sense from a lot of these guys, the ones that were here last year on offense, that they are happy to be turning over a new leaf with this offense. They are happy to have some different ideas in there. They seem to really like Arthur Smith's offense so far. And again, you know, we say this all with the disclaimer that we realize what time of year it is. We realize that there hasn't been even a minor test of these schemes and these approaches in even a preseason game yet. So I say that with that disclaimer. But every single person you talk to who was here on this roster last year, they have had a lot of similarities in what they've talked about regarding this offense. And those things are that every position group feels like they're heavily involved in the offense one way or the other. Every tight end we've talked to has felt that their responsibility has increased in this new offense. Every wide receiver we've talked to so far has been complimentary of the scheme, and that there's going to be some room to grow, especially some room to make some deeper plays. And that's because Arthur Smith brings such a run heavy approach, such a physical approach. Every offense he's run has had that type of characteristic. And so then, of course, you have the offensive line, who really feels like they're going to be challenged this year to be very physical, win the line of scrimmage, and then really open up the running game. So I think we've just really heard from every position group positive things about this. The other thing that I've heard a lot, speaking separately with a bunch of individuals on the offense, is that accountability really seems to be something that they continue to talk about. We were talking to Calvin Austin. These days blend together, but I think it was last week.
And Calvin Austin's always willing to talk.
Yeah.
He's probably one of the more like happy-go-lucky guys that you'll find in that locker room. So you like somebody like that, you hope will have some success on the field, even though it's been kind of in fits and starts thus far for him in 2 seasons.
Yeah, and he really is an awesome guy. He's always willing to, you know, give us some insight and willing to chat with us with a smile on his face. And something that he talked about a lot is accountability. And he said something along the lines of, it's not lip service. We're not just talking about it in the room and then it's not being translated to the field. When we talk about something in a meeting, we're expected to show that on the field, and Arthur Smith is continually calling that out. And so because we don't really know still what this offense is going to look like come September, what you're seeing are these baseline attitudes and mentalities showing up in these conversations with these guys about physicality and about accountability. And that's what I think I've taken away most from this offense.
Yeah, I'll riff on a few things right there. First of all, as far as, you mentioned the O-line being excited to play that physical brand of football. Every level of football that I've ever covered, Shelby, whether it was kids at Pine Richland High School or McKeesport, or when I covered Pitt for the Post-Gazette, or in the 5 years that I've been doing the Steelers, every O-lineman just wants to run the ball. You ask them, like, do you have a preference? No, I don't have any preference, but we want to run the ball. Like, it's always easier for them to line up and just try to move people from point A to point B in the ground game rather than being on their heels and worrying about, these 6'5", 260-pound specimen pass rushers at this level. So, yeah, I mean, that's always going to make any lineman happy. Now, the flip side of that is you better go out and establish the run and get a lead, or else the game script is going to force you to drop back and throw the ball a bunch of times. So that always is a double-edged sword. Number two, the receivers, whether it's Calvin Austin or a young guy, a rookie like Roman Wilson getting his first taste of the NFL. I mean, I think there is an accountability that was needed in that group. I mean, Deontay Johnson was traded this offseason. A lot of these new players, whether they're free agent signings or rookies, they have opportunities here. And I mean, I think we can all agree that one of the more, let's just say, headache-inducing position groups of the Steelers the last couple of years has been those wideouts, both in terms of the production or lack thereof on the field, and then some of the tomfoolery that's gone on either on the sideline or in the locker room or whatever. So there probably did need to be a little bit of a culture change in there. And number three, going back to the run game, as far as players feeling like a renewed sense of excitement, it's kind of ironic that I'll bring this up because he's one of the few players we haven't heard from on the offense, but you can just see it out there on the practice field, and that's Najee Harris. I think he was a guy last season who, at the times when you were around, Shelby, with Channel 11, I'm sure you noticed some of it too. He was kind of at the crux of the Matt Canada issues mid-season, and it was him speaking out in the post-game locker room after the loss in Cleveland that, was just a couple days preceding Matt Canada being fired mid-season, which was extremely out of character for the Steelers organization. So he's just somebody who I'll be curious to hear from him when he does, finally grant some interviews. Like, are you pumped coming into this season, despite the fifth-year option not being picked up? I've just seen such a zest and a pep in the step of number 22, even though there's all these extenuating circumstances with his financial future and everything that would lead you to believe maybe he wouldn't have that going into year 4.
Yeah. And, we haven't talked to him yet, so it's hard to assume. But what I would guess with Najee Harris, or what you would think an approach like his would be right now, is the fact that you do have an offensive coordinator who is coming in with a very clear identity for this offense. There wasn't a very clear identity for this offense in the last couple of years. And so when you have an offensive coordinator coming in, he has a very specific brand of football that he's liked to play throughout all of his roles that allowed him to call an offense. And that is a very physical, run-heavy approach that relies a lot on play action. And so when you have an offensive coordinator coming in from the outset saying, hey, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, this offense relies very heavily on your legs here, I think that would provide, at least if I were a player, a bit of pep in my step very early on, knowing this offense is in many ways going to run through me. I have to be on my game. And on top of that, I'm in a year that's going to maybe make or break the money I'm going to make next year, whether it be in Pittsburgh or elsewhere. And so he does have, not having a fifth-year option picked up is a reason to be disgruntled. And I get that. But it doesn't seem like Najee Harris is, because he also has a lot of opportunity here to make a bigger name for himself, to create a spot for himself that could lead to a bigger payday down the road, could lead to more opportunity with the Steelers. He has the chance to really shine in this offense, right? And I think he very much so realizes that.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of the vocal leadership qualities out of him, which is interesting because, of course, as we know, a little bit of a leadership saga with Najee. He was a captain a couple years ago. He wasn't last year when it was kind of just Kenny Pickett as the face of the offense. I wouldn't be surprised if he's maybe even back in that role. I guess we'll see how the team votes come late August or early September. And plus, I mean, yes, he was somebody who, and a lot of players last year kind of used identity as that buzzword. If they were playing well offensively, which we know was rare in year 3 for Matt Canada, they would say, we're finding our identity. If they weren't putting up points and yards, they would say, we're looking for our identity. But I still just remember, I mean, even after Matt Canada was kicked to the curb, that last playoff game in Buffalo in the post-game locker room, Najee Harris was saying that sometimes they just need to run it anyway, and that maybe they're going to be more willing to do that under the Arthur Smith regime. Maybe they'll be more capable of doing that as well with some of their upgrades on the offensive line. Okay, Shelby, here's what we're going to do for the second half of the show. I mentioned this to you via text as well.
Which I love.
Have some fun with it. Yeah. So Monday, the Steelers did not have OTAs. They had one on the schedule, as they tend to do. They usually do like a team bonding trip or something like that instead of a bonus day of football work. And where they went this year was Kennywood, a big team group trip over to the amusement park in West Mifflin here, about 20 minutes outside the city. If we're having some Steelers fans listening around the country or around the world who aren't as familiar, but I will pose this question to you, Shelby. I want to make some comparisons in honor of this trip by the Steelers. I would like to liken some Kennywood rides to current Steelers players or coaches, if you feel that there's an apt analogy there. And do you want to start? Do you have one in mind, or do you want me to kick this thought exercise off?
Yeah, I do. I do have one in mind. First of all, I want to say that Sierra also made an appearance. It looked like at Kennywood yesterday with Russell Wilson and their kids. So that was a pretty cool thing.
And she made one of those maybe one of those basketball shots, which you've never played that. Yeah. It always looks so easy, but then you get up there and the ball is like basically
the hoop is an oval basically. It doesn't. Yes. They make it so that you can fail basically, but
and the ball's overinflated. It's bouncing all over the place, but I guess Sierra's just got that wet jump shot that who knew?
She does. But so we'll actually start there. Russell Wilson, I am likening to the Phantom's Revenge. The Phantom, I think it was the Steel Phantom initially when it was it first came about. They tore it down, they built the Phantom's Revenge, and that's been in place for a while now. But I liken Russell Wilson to the Phantom's Revenge because it had to reinvent itself at some point. It's now a little bit on the older side. I think it was built, when we were kids. So the Phantom's Revenge Kennywood had to find a new way to take the Steel Phantom and make it a better ride. And Russell Wilson is at that point in his career, right? He had an incredible run with Seattle, but it hasn't been there the last couple of years. And so he's got to tear himself down a little bit this offseason, build a better ride, build a better player, and be in a position where at his age he can still excel. Because if he doesn't, obviously Justin Fields is right behind him. And so this year is Russell Wilson's revenge in many ways because he still has a lot to prove that he's still got it. He hasn't been able to prove that in the last couple of years. Granted, last season individually was a better year for him, but he just couldn't find the right combination with the rest of his Denver offense. So this year is Russell Wilson's revenge. He is the Phantom's revenge, and I'm anxious to see if he can be a better quarterback and ultimately a better ride this year for Steelers fans.
I actually had that same exact one in mind, and I'll tell you why, because it was kind of in tandem with, and the other thing is the Phantom's revenge can still be a very good roller coaster. You can still very much enjoy that, even if it feels like it's a little bit of an older one, but Justin Fields for me is going to be the Steel Curtain coaster, which made big headlines earlier this spring because it is closed for the season. And I'm assuming that Justin Fields, if he doesn't, win the job out of camp, which I think is unlikely, and if Russell Wilson doesn't falter, we may not see Justin Fields at quarterback this season either, even though it is a highly anticipated attraction on this team or at this park. You probably have a lot of people who would rather have the Justin Fields / Steel Curtain experience than the Russell Wilson Phantom's Revenge that they've already seen. So I think that's a very good 1-2 comparison right there. Russell Wilson as the Phantom's Revenge, Justin Fields as the Steel Curtain. Do you have any more for me, Shelby? Is there any others that come to mind?
Well, you could also, that also kind of plays into the argument that we can make Ben Roethlisberger the log jammer, because the log jammer was deconstructed to make way for the steel curtain. And given the Steelers' quarterback woes over the last couple of years, many people have been wishing that they had the Ben Roethlisberger of old. And there's a lot of nostalgia with Ben Roethlisberger. There's a lot of nostalgia with the log jammer. I hear people say, well, why did they tear the log jammer down to put up the steel curtain? That doesn't work. And I think in many ways, Ben Roethlisberger is the log jammer that many people wish to have in his prime back. But I will also say I'm going to go with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren as the racer. It's the tandem.
I had that as well. We are on the same page here.
Same page. The tandem roller coaster. One. I think it's blue and red. Is that like the blue and red?
Sometimes there's a green car in there. Okay, sometimes there might be an orange car, but yeah.
For this conversation, you have the blue car and the red car, and it's the tandem roller coaster that races. Sometimes the blue car wins, sometimes the red car wins, but ultimately the ride doesn't work if one is off track, right? So you have Najee Harris, you have Jaylen Warren. I mean, they work really well together, but sometimes it's a race too. Sometimes you do want to see who's going to have the better game. But again, if one is off, the entire thing falls apart. The ride is close. So you got to have both guys on track at the same time. One's going to have a better game than the other every once in a while, but you got to have both Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris running at the same time, having good games at the same time, or else we've seen the Steelers run game not work. It works best when they are together.
100% had that on my Kennywood Steelers bingo card as well. All right, I'm going to go with two of the wooden roller coasters here, and I'm going to compare them to two defensive players. TJ Watt is the Thunderbolt.
Okay, that's
again,
a good one.
He's about to be 30 now, right? So he's getting a little bit up there in age. I think he himself told Steelers.com that this is the first time in his career he started to feel old. But still, arguably the best ride in the park. I mean, you're getting jerked around. You're going at a high rate of speed, even on a really old track. So TJ Watt still got it. The other wooden coaster that I'm going to bring up here, the Jackrabbit, for me, is Cam Heyward. Still gets the job done. Still fun. Still maybe that first ride that you think of or you sit on when you go to Kennywood, and maybe Cam's the first player that Steelers fans think of as the longest tenured guy in the room. But I will say this, on the flip side, is anybody really building their Kennywood day around the Jackrabbit? Is anybody waiting in line for like 2 hours to ride the Jackrabbit? So, I mean, it's got its place, but we also know that, it's kind of from an age gone by, and it definitely needs to be supplemented by a lot of the other rides around it. And even though it is, it remains an integral piece of the overall experience, you just have to kind of understand what the current roles and dynamics are with it.
Interesting. I have one that's maybe a little bit off the wall, but hear me out.
Okay.
I'm going Cordarrelle Patterson as the Pittsburgh Plunge, okay? And that is because of his splash play ability. I know he's 33. I know that, maybe his better days have gone by, but he's still the greatest returner in the history of the sport, essentially. And so with this new kickoff, they've obviously signed him essentially as soon as that rule passed this summer. I am very curious to see what his splash play ability will be like back there with this new kickoff rule. People tend to think that this is going to make the kickoff a much more relevant play. They're going to be more up. We just talked to Miles Killebrew last week about this, obviously a good person to talk to about special teams changes. Sure. And he feels that it's going to create more touchdowns. It's going to be a more relevant play. It's going to be something that you scheme for in a bigger way that you already do. And so Cordarrelle Patterson, the new returner for the Steelers, I'm going with the Pittsburgh Plunge because I think in this new setup, in this new role, he's going to have that splash play ability back and make special teams an asset for the Steelers.
And you know what? That also works in terms of he's not going to be impacting every phase of the game, probably. I don't know that there's going to be a big role for him on offense. So he's kind of a specialized piece there. And also, if it's an unseasonably chilly Pittsburgh day in June, such as we might have this weekend, you might not want to ride the Pittsburgh Plunge if it's 70 degrees outside or 65 degrees outside at the end of the day at Kennywood. So he's got his role. There's a time and place for it, but it can also be one of the best experiences if it's a hot day and you need one of those big plays in the special teams game. So
you essentially, if you plan your Kennywood day correctly, in my opinion. You're riding the Pittsburgh Plunge and the Raging Rapids last because you don't want to walk around soggy all day. So, you don't want special teams to have to win you games, but ultimately it does. And so as a last ditch effort, your special teams has to come through to win games sometimes. That could be him.
And my 4-year-old's favorite thing to do at Kennywood at this point in his life is to just stand on the bridge. And get choked by the Pittsburgh Plunge, waterfall there. I don't know what that has to do with Cordero Patterson, but I just wanted to go ahead and point
that has some pop to it. Like a little guy waiting for you get blown back a little bit when you stand on that bridge. It's a good way to get the enjoyment of the ride without having to stand in line.
Yeah, he's like simultaneously frightened and thrilled by it every single time the cascade of water comes crushing his little head. So, but yes, it cools him down, which is good. All right, Shelby. Well, hey, I think I'll go ahead and get you out of here. I know we both have to head down to the facility shortly, but thanks so much for joining me. Do you want to plug anything or tell any of our viewers where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Shelby Cassesse on Twitter and Instagram. We'll be having OTAs coverage all week, obviously, with mini camp to follow, and also working on some Olympic coverage because we have the Olympics coming up on NBC this summer. So we're getting that stuff together and keep an eye out on that for the rest of the summer. You're a busy reporter. We love to see it. Thank you. Thank you so much to Shelby Cassesse from WPXI here in Pittsburgh. I'm Brian Batko, Steelers beat writer for the Post-Gazette. This has been another episode of Chipped Ham and Football. Thanks as always for finding us. Keep it locked on the Post-Gazette website and our YouTube page for plenty more content from the last week of OTAs and then minicamp last week. And then things will go dry a little bit before training camp, but I'm sure we'll come up with something to talk about. Thanks again to Shelby. Thanks to you all for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.